Hi everyone, my name's Tara Kapur and I was invited by HDFC Sky to talk about my journey towards becoming a financially independent woman. When they first called me for this, I was extremely nervous and didn't think I was the right fit simply because I haven't been great with my investments, especially earlier on in my career. And this journey towards becoming financially independent started much later for me. But when I started doing some research on the topic, I was really surprised to know that close to 60% of Indian women aren't in control of their financial investments and don't take an active role in that. And I realized that there was a lot that I could add in terms of talking about my journey and how I got to the place that I'm at today. So before I tell you some of my investment tips, I wanted to tell you my story and how I started becoming financially independent. And like I said, in the beginning of my career, I was a bit of a disaster when it came to saving. At that point, I wasn't even thinking about saving money. I was running literally paycheck to paycheck. And I wasn't even great at tracking my expenses. And what I would do was, I had just moved to Bombay. I was in the media industry. I was working as a journalist. And we weren't making massive salaries at that point. It was very soon after the 08-09 recession. And it was simply, paying my rent, trying to figure out ways to entertain myself in an expensive city like Bombay, and just trying to go till the next salary sort of came into my bank account. And obviously not a very sustainable way to operate, but the biggest trigger happened for me at a point when I went over on my credit card in terms of just not paying my bill on time. And that was a real shocker for me because that was literally the tipping point where I realized that I needed to be way more in control of my expenses. And this might be a really silly example because, most people will be shocked, being like, how did you actually manage to do that? But I feel like when that happens, that's when you really get triggered to realize how out of control this was going from paycheck to paycheck. For those of you that don't know, if you go over on your credit card bill, the interest rate goes to 36% in most cases, which is really high and caused a really stressful situation for me in my life. Post that, I realized I needed to be a lot more in control and really started tracking where I was at when I was spending money and started trying to develop a mindset towards saving. And when that happened, I realized that even on being on a lower salary, I could save money. My mindset earlier was, I'll save money when I start making more money. But I realized that even when you make smaller salaries, you can still save a significant amount. And when I started doing that, I was able to, spend on that holiday that I had been planning, but wasn't able to go on because I didn't have the finances for it, or buy that gift, or, spoil myself a little bit, which were just splurge purchases that I hadn't been able to plan for initially. Early to mid-stage, I realized that saving small sums also has a compounding effect, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on in this as well. But it also gave me a mindset towards being clear about my investments. But a lot of it was just kind of like parking it towards the mid to short term in terms of like things that I wanted to do in life. As I progressed, going ahead, that's around the time I also met my husband, who works in finance, interestingly enough. But instead of it being a relationship where I was just like, hey, can you manage my finances? It was a journey of him actually educating me on decisions that I needed to make financially so that I could be independent with my decisions instead of depending on the man in my relationship. Post-marriage, we've kind of followed that system in our relationship as well, where we both make our financial decisions independently as well as together. And that's a mindset that I feel a lot of families also need to evolve towards, especially in Indian households, where typically we see the woman's salary going towards household expenses and the man's salary going towards investments. It needs to be a combination of both across both partners in the relationship. And I think that's something that we're hoping to see a stronger evolution towards Indian society. But yeah, so that's a little bit of where I'm at today. Today, I can comfortably say I feel very comfortable where I'm at. And instead of just thinking about the present, I have enough of my investments that are planned towards my retirement, towards my future, towards, the much more long term of my life. And I feel a lot more stable and comfortable in that process. Just wanted to share 5 tips of how I've gotten here. Obviously, everyone's going to be in various stages of their financial journey, but hoping some of these are useful to you. So with that, I'm going to share tip number 1, which is track your savings and not just your expenses. In most Indian households, women are absolutely on top of understanding their spending habits and expenses of their households, from, tuition fees, bills, any other consumption patterns that are happening in their homes. And that's typically because a large part of their income or their husband has given them a certain amount of money to budget towards household expenses, and they keep a good tab of the bills and keep accounting for that. But they're not as involved in where money is being saved and what they're saving for, how much that's reaching, what the value is. And I think the first step towards developing an investment mindset is being involved in both aspects of the budgeting, of budgeting in their homes. Tip number 2 is to understand the value of compounding effects. And I have a strong example for this. Think of, your grandmom or your household help and how they used to save money or how they still save money. Typically, when I remember my grandmom, she used to, take that 50 rupees, 10 rupees and just park it aside in her cupboard. And there was a lot of psychological safety she used to feel to have that stack of money saved in her cupboard for a rainy day, an emergency expense that might have come up. But the unfortunate part with that is that money is not growing for you and is not creating more value. So if it's just sitting in your bank account, it works in the same kind of way. You don't have to be really great at math to understand this, but there's a really good example of the compounding effect of investing 5,000 rupees in the equity market over 10 years. When you do that, take an average of it growing at about 12%, which is typically what happens in the equity market, and then you're saving 20 lakhs by the end of that time period. And I think that's something that's really important for people to understand. You can look this up and understand, how that can grow depending on how much that investment grows per month as well, and what your, actual ability to save is. But when you think of it from that small number, which is 5,000 rupees a month, it feels realistic. And then when you think of the end value, you really start understanding why investments are important. Tip number 3 is being financially independent doesn't mean you're going solo. What do I mean by that? There are so many people out there that can support you with your investment decisions, and you don't have to be completely savvy from day one when you're trying to figure this journey out. The example I gave you earlier of my husband, he works in finance, and he has given me a lot of advice on what I can do for my investments. And obviously is somebody I can trust to help me make the right decisions. Along with that, I do a lot of research, I read a lot of books, and I spend a lot of time trying to understand more and educate myself in the space. Similarly, there are fin-influencers. SkyLearn is an example that exists out there. There's experts that you can actually pay who can help you make these decisions, who do this professionally. Find what works for you and find sources that you trust, and then use that to make your informed decisions. So there's an army out there that can support you as you become financially independent. You're not in this alone. Tip number 4 is to understand what your risk appetite is and to take decisions accordingly. This can vary from person to person, gender to gender. Typically, women have a much lower risk appetite in comparison to men, but you need to see what the comfort zone is for you. What do I mean by this? And I'll just use my own example because that's the only guiding point I have for this. But please do your own research and think of what's comfortable for you, and obviously based on the income that you're making as well. For me, my risk appetite isn't super high, but I'm willing to take smaller punts in certain areas. So majority of my investment goes towards slightly lower risk investments like mutual funds and SIPs, but a small portion of my investments goes towards these risks that I'm willing to take, where I'm okay if I lose that amount of money, but the potential upside of that could be super high. The example that I like to use for this is playing cards at Diwali, right? You're willing to take a chance, have some fun, experiment, and hopefully make something out of that entire process. Where I do this is in two places. One is in crypto, where it was such a big buzzword a couple of years ago, still is lurking around somewhere. Obviously, there's a lot of ups and downs with it, and I decided to try and ride that wave and see what happens. It's a small sum of money. I don't know where it's going, and I'm okay with where it lands overall. The second place that I invest my money with this risk angle is in smaller businesses. I don't invest in too many. I currently invest in two, but that's where I've really understood the founders, their story, their company journey, and I'm willing to take a punt on them. So let's see where those go. I'd love you to evaluate this for yourself and figure out where you'd like to take a couple of chances and experiment. Tip number 5 is not necessarily an investment tip, but it's something that gives me a lot of satisfaction, and that's to track how much money your investments are making every couple of months. Not only does this make sure you're on top of, where all you're invested and, making sure your passwords are updated, making sure you're comfortable with how much money you have where, it also gives a lot of personal satisfaction and positivity because you're actually seeing that compounding value for yourself. Let's think back to that grandma example that I gave you, right? There's comfort that you get with that wad of money in the bank account. That same feeling can come to you when you're able to understand how much money you have where and what that value is, every few months. And as you see that growth, there's a lot of it makes me feel good. I hope it does the same for you as well. So that's it with my tips. I hope it was useful for you and that we can see more women become savvy with their investments going ahead. We're seeing women's incomes continue to grow exponentially over time, and I'm hoping that we're seeing that independence in terms of investments grow as well in the future. Big shout out to HDFC Sky for having me be a part of this video. You can check out their website to get more details on investments, some information if it's useful for you. If this video helped, do drop in any other tips or any other notes you might have in the comments.